Want to bring in former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He's also a CNBC contributor, serves on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. In his latest op-ed piece over the weekend, he discusses why it's so important to win the race for a vaccine for the U.S. economy. Good morning to you. Doctor, it's great to talk to you. I want to talk about that vaccine in just a moment, but I want to talk about reopening for a second, because I did speak with a number of business leaders and also small business owners over the weekend who are actually in some of these states trying to make a go of it. And the real question I think that they keep asking is, can they make a go of it? Which is to say, it's one thing to say you're going to reopen. It's another thing to actually make your business work in a reopened world. So if you're in a restaurant business, a lot of the restaurant owners I'm talking to are saying the entire economic model actually doesn't work if we actually have to be social distanced. Meaning if we have to go 3 more months like this, where half the restaurant is going to have to be empty and we have all these additional costs on top of it, tell me I'm reopened, but I might as well not be. What do you tell those people?
Well, look, I think the question is the consumer going to come back? And I think the way to bring the consumer back into businesses, into stores, into restaurants, into hair salons is to give them confidence that there really isn't pervasive spread of this disease in the United States. And the reality is there is still pervasive spread of coronavirus across the entire nation. There's parts of the country, there's states where they never really had a significant outbreak, that they certainly meet the criteria to start reopening aspects of the economy. I count about 5 states that meet the criteria that the White House has set out in terms of sustained reductions in new cases. But for most parts of the country, they've plateaued, but they haven't really started to show sustained declines in new cases. Remember, we're still showing more than 30,000 new cases a day and still recording about 2,000 deaths a day. So while we've plateaued, there's evidence that we've plateaued, and New York is starting to come down very slowly. Across the nation, we're still very much in the throes of this epidemic. So I think we've got a couple of weeks to go until we start to see those sustained declines. And I think until we reach that point, consumers just aren't going to have confidence. You can reopen things, but I don't know that consumers really come back in the numbers that businesses are going to need.
Doctor, perhaps the single most forwarded article around the education world over the weekend was a piece by the head of Brown University on that university's plans to reopen in the fall and how they plan to do it. I just want to walk through it for you. I don't know if you know about it, because a lot of educators are saying if that's how we have to do it, I don't know how we're going to. He's talking about testing every single student, teacher, every single person who walks into the school on day 1 and then doing it regularly. All of the students wearing masks, 2 classes, all big classes being done on Zoom rather than actually in class, social distancing in the town. So restaurants, bars, all of that obviously would be either closed or in a social distanced way. Taking over hotels in Providence so that you could use them as a quarantine infirmary of sorts, and effectively taking everybody's privacy away because everybody would have to be on an app. And every time you're tested, you would go into a system. So it would be a closed system. And a lot of educators are looking at that saying, that's a very interesting model. But if that's the model, that may be hard to pull off around the country.
Well, look, we don't know what's going to happen in the fall. We're either going to have sustained spread of this virus and a smoldering infection, or we're not. And we have to wait and see. There's a real chance that come the fall, we have tools in place that we can mitigate small outbreaks and detect small outbreaks, and we're not facing a constant risk of this infection. Or there's a chance that we never really get rid of the infection. It smolders through the summer. When we come back in the fall, it sort of explodes into new large outbreaks and maybe even risks another epidemic. And if the latter scenario bears true, I'm not sure we're going to have residential college campuses. It's going to be a tough environment. If we can keep this virus at bay and try to control it and just have really small outbreaks and we're able to detect them very quickly, we'll be able to go on with our lives with much less risk than we're facing right now. So we're going to have to see what happens. Remember, we may also have, to the other point you said at the outset, a vaccine in the fall that's, while not approved, is deployable in the setting of an outbreak. So our toolbox could be very different in the fall, and our risk profile could be very different.
Dr. Gottlieb, on that point, Mitch Daniels actually put out a letter to Purdue over the weekend, and Purdue alum, everybody who picked up on this, who said, look, they think it's going to be okay because most of their students are of the age that doesn't seem like there's a huge impact, but they're going to have to find ways to separate those people from others. And so I was thinking, you bring all the students back and then don't get them anywhere near the professors who are going to be older. But I want to talk to you about your piece in the Wall Street Journal today. This idea that we need to make sure we're building a vaccine and it's happening here in America first. That's a huge issue. And I thought about this a little bit before. There are potential vaccines that maybe look like they are on the cusp of things in other countries. But what are the odds that we're going to be, where will we be in line in terms of receiving that vaccination? And I think that's your point with this, is we need to make sure we're working pretty hard right here.
Yeah, well, we don't need to be first. I think we need what we want in an ideal world is to have a vaccine simultaneously in many parts of the world. I think the reality is that the vaccines that come to the market are going to be invariably supply constrained. No one's going to come to market with a vaccine and have 1 billion doses of it. They'll maybe have 50 million, 100 million doses. And so as much as countries say that they're going to share those vaccines, they're going to prioritize inoculating their own populations. And in fact, in 2009 with H1N1, we had a vaccine that was destined for the United States being manufactured in a foreign country. It was a U.S. product that was manufactured in a foreign facility. And that country said, you know what, we're going to hold on to your doses and vaccinate our population before we ship you what you're owed. So this is what's going to probably happen in an environment if you have epidemics and outbreaks in the fall. And so we need to make sure that we have a supply here. We need to make sure that we have manufacturers stood up here. We can't just rely on China or even the Europeans to share vaccine with us before they supply their local population. If you look at what's going on in the world right now, there's 6 vaccines in clinical trials right now, 3 in early stage clinical trials, 3 in more advanced clinical trials. The 3 that are in advanced clinical trials are in China. They're entering phase 2, phase 3 studies. They may have a vaccine, they said, in early 2021 that's fully licensed and available for their population. So we risk being behind the curve on this and not having it available. And the point I made in the piece is that this is a public health achievement, but we also need to remember that the first country to have a vaccine and be able to mass inoculate the population is first to restore their economy as well. So it was really a wake-up call, hopefully, to policymakers to say this is really important and we need to put resources into it.
Hey, Doctor, you saw the WHO. It was kind of almost a controversy, and they actually changed some of their comments in their tweet. It was reported initially that definitively that your antibodies don't give you immunity long-term for the virus. Then the WHO changed, the WHO changed the language and said there's no evidence at this point that you get long-term immunity. Do you think this is a case where we need to hope for the best but prepare for the worst? Normally, the way the immune system works, and I know we have seasonal flu, but that's a different flu every year. But normally, if your immune system has seen something as specific as COVID-19, there would be immunity for a certain amount of time, right? Or do we just have no idea whether once you've had it that you don't get it again?
Well, that was a characteristically cautious and muddled statement by the WHO, right, consistent with things they've been saying throughout this epidemic. I mean, there's no reason to believe that if you have this infection, you're not going to develop some level of immunity. Right. You will develop some level of immunity. Some people might not. There's variability, but if this behaves like every other virus and every other coronavirus, you're going to develop antibodies and they'll confer some level of immunity. Now, how long that immunity lasts, how strong it is, we don't know. It might not last that long in certain people. It might not be that strong so you can get reinfected but perhaps not get as sick. But most people are going to develop some level of immunity that's going to last some period of time. So I didn't understand that statement. It's inconsistent with everything we know about viruses. Now, it's fair to say if you have antibodies and you test yourself and you have antibodies, it's no guarantee you can't get it again. That's a reasonable statement. But you're going to have some level of immunity.